What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're actually going to take a little bit of a turn of different events because I'm way overdue to do it. I finally got the parts in after sending them back 3 times. We're actually going to be assembling a bottom end today, measuring bearing clearance, a few other things. But one thing I do want to say, as much as I want to get to the Z right now, I actually have to finish this bottom end so I can get it to Brad because I'm way late on getting this back to him. But what I do want to say is, if you guys haven't been able to notice, we're missing a car, and it's actually getting picked up right now. So we actually have Carl's Z, and we got it all finished up. We did the 120K timing kit, and we also swapped his alternator. Everything's back to how it was, and it's running, so we really get to move on and try to get into Blade and Z. But first, let's hook Brad up. So I did just paint this block earlier. It was a little crusty. It's been cleaned up some, but we actually need to do a little bit more deep cleaning. And I'm actually really bummed that I can't get this oil block plug out the front. I really need a welder to get it the rest of the way out. But here we have taped off all of our freeze plugs. And we're actually gonna have to install some freeze plugs. Over here we've got cylinder 1 through 6 with all of the rings that were previously gapped correctly. And now we've managed to get some new bearings. And we do have to clean up the girdle and swap over those bearings. We also have a crank chilling here. Crank's fresh out the machine shop, or technically the crank machine. Got it cleaned up before I took it, but I'm still gonna clean it a little bit just because, as much as I feel safe with that bag. So technically, first and foremost, before we do anything here, since it's been sitting in Brad's garage for a little bit and has gotten kind of dirty, we're actually gonna go try to buy some parts cleaner solution and some way to clean it so we can actually clean all this up and then be able to have a debris-free engine, rotating assembly, and put it all together. So let's go grab something, probably from the Tractor Supply, and let's clean some stuff. So we just got back from the store. I goofed up and I missed my GoPro for the transition. Womp womp. But we got some stuff, and we actually kind of thought of a DIY parts washer, or a way to clean this block without buying a $200 parts washer and $100 in fluid. So we've got a 5-gallon of fluid for like 50 bucks at Tractor Supply. Grabbed us a tote, medium-sized tote, doesn't need to be too big. And we've got one of these fluid transfer pumps from Harbor Freight. So my goal is to put this underneath the engine, set it up on blocks, and as we pump the fluid out of this, we can direct it through these oil ports everywhere throughout the block, and we can actually clean the block and allow everything to drain out down into that, and then we can filter it out and reuse it. We also grabbed this kit from Harbor Freight so we can use this attachment with all these brushes to get in these galleries and get all the residuals cleaned up. We did also grab a little bit of blue Loctite so we can install our freeze plugs. Definitely don't want to use red RTV like a lot of the videos online do. Ugh, I hate that stuff. Now we actually did already thoroughly clean this thing, so I'm just looking to get any debris out of the galleries, so we just make sure that it's contaminant free and we don't, tear up any bearings on startup. I want this to be as nice as I can for Brad. I guess we can pull all this tape out too. Well, here goes nothing. Let's see if my theory is actually going to work out. I have a feeling a lot of it's just going to come shooting back out at me. Okay, I think this is going to work, except we have a little bit to address. We just shot a bunch of fluid out over here. So I may look for something that we can thread into that to keep that from happening, because that was a lot of fluid. Just rotate it on its side. Let's see if that does anything else. Sweet. Ah, no. Maybe not. I forgot, we actually have a gallery up here that shoots oil to the head, and we made a mess again. It's actually been a couple minutes. I ran maybe a gallon through, just kind of pulsating and also blocking this oil feed over here, because if you see, it launches out. We also have one over here to bring oil to the other head, so when we block it, we can kind of pulsate everything out from this opposing side. Well, if you look on the top of the deck, look at all that actually came out of that gallery. Same thing over there on the other one. So we're definitely getting some stuff out of here. And now if we were going to start this how we were previously, we would be absolutely disgusted to see that, none of this would have went how we wanted it to go. So So we grabbed the smallest nylon brush attachment. We're just gonna run this down, clean what we can out. Just kind of knock any of that debris loose that, you know, may be a little stuck. Even though we've been pumping fluid through, you can see those little pieces of debris on the brush. So we need to get all of that out, obviously. Now you really probably could put this on your drill, since it's, or an impact, because it's the same kind of hex bit. But I'm just going to use the brush so I can get more of a hand feel, so if it binds, I'm not going to absolutely destroy it. Safe to say, there's still dirt and debris. So let's get this the rest of the way cleaned up and get to where we can maybe start assembling some stuff. So now it's the next day. I know I stink. I've kind of just been fumbling days here, but I have to make sure everything is absolutely as clean as it can be, because any little bit of debris in here can ruin all this. But now we're ready to flip the block over, install the main bearings, some thrust bearings, and we actually have to set the thrust after we put the girdle on. Now, if you guys need to know how to measure these out before you put all this together, I actually have an older video on when we did do this originally, but we're actually going to be doing a VG for our 300ZX here next, if you do want to know. So since we already measured all of our bearing clearance and we actually had issues with our rods and our crank and had it repolished, we're actually going to reuse all the bearings since they're already clearanced. I actually had 2 rods that were polished up. So there's going to be these little tangs on the side, and that's going to help you place it. And your groove side with the oil is always going to go in the block like these oil grooves, because it's actually feeding all the oil to your bearing. You absolutely do not want to pre-lube this surface before you put the bearing in, because if you do, you can actually change the clearance of the bearing, because oil doesn't compress, it's hydraulic. So basically it's going to force this bearing outwards and it'll actually change your clearance. So I always kind of place the tang in first, then rotate the bearing in, just like that. Now following that same ordeal, line up your tang and install your bearings in your girdle or main cap. Now we're going to take some of this assembly lube. We're actually going to coat these main bearings prior to dropping the crank in. We're also going to do the same thing to the girdle so we can make sure everything is pre-lubricated and there's not going to be any metal on metal contact. It is best to go back with a brush, you know, coat everything down. I'll be a little liberal with it and coat it up. Better safe than sorry. Be super careful about dropping this in. Let's go ahead and drop a little bit of grease on this girdle. Now we're actually going to have to set our thrust bearings prior to, you know, putting all this on, because the thrust bearing is actually going to ride right inside of here in this little gap. So as your crank moves forward and backwards, as you hit the clutch or take off, you know, it's going to actually take that load instead of trashing your bearings. When you install the thrust bearing, at least on these VR4s or 3000 GTs, the flat side is going to go towards the block. So these oil drain offs can actually go on the crank side. There's going to be this little tab, so you're going to look for the widest spot. You're actually just going to feed that down in. But we're going to lube it up just a little first. And we're going to do the same thing on the girdle side. Our thrust bearings in the girdle. Just flip it upside down. Let's install this bad boy. So now you'll see it kind of sits crooked. This is where you want to grab a mallet and tap it down into place so you actually don't let it move anywhere. So since we see it's a little higher over here, I'm going to try to walk the side down. If not, you can just use your bolts to kind of pull it into place. But there, it's starting to go down. Just do this until it's flush. See how that sound's changing? It means it's starting to mate. Yep, we're good. Let's grab all of our main bolts. So basically we're going to tighten these down all the way and then loosen them a little bit so we can actually set the thrust on the engine. Before you freak out that I'm using an impact, it's literally just on the torque sensor so I can tighten it down. So now that it's pretty much snug, what you want to do is you want to tap the crank backwards, or technically forwards and then backwards. So basically you want this girdle to be loose so the girdle can actually move, because if you just put these two on top of each other, the mating surfaces between here and the block are actually not going to be aligned. They could be kind of like this, like stepped over. So what you want to do to set that thrust is when this is loose, tap it back so you can actually move the girdle to match where the block is at. And this is going to set your thrust so you don't wear your thrust bearings out when you're, hitting the clutch or taking off, whatnot. I'm going to do just like a half turn. So there's absolutely nothing here that's tight. After setting that thrust, I can actually feel with my finger between the girdle and the block, especially back here by the thrust bearing, that it is as smooth as it's going to get. Now we can actually go back to torque these main bolts down. I actually downloaded a factory service manual, so I really need to consult that real quick. So if you look at this screenshot of the factory service manual, we're going to be tightening it to 67 foot-pounds on the main bolts. So we're actually going to do like a 30 and then a 67. We'll just kind of spiral outwards. Now we're going to bump up to that 67 final value. Now we actually don't really need to recheck torque, but I'm going to just for peace of mind. Now we've got 4 bolts here on the side of the girdle. These should be 14 mil, and these are actually going to be torqued down to 35 foot-pounds. So now that our crank is in and it actually spins very nicely at that, we're actually ready to move on to our pistons. So we actually just went ahead, dipped all of these rings, we washed them over and all the parts fluid to get all the residual oil off, because I actually used assembly lube last time. You don't want to use assembly lube on your pistons or your cylinder walls because it's very, very slick. And basically you want your rings to bed in on your walls, so you want to use actual engine oil instead of assembly lube. So when we go to install and gap all of our rings, before we put it in the ring compressor, we're actually going to oil up all the rings with just some 5W20. I think that's what this is. Just something to help it all go down in the cylinder. And we're also going to lubricate the cylinder a little bit. So technically, that means we need to flip this engine over. But since we're going to be working on the first cylinder up here, we want to bring this journal the farthest away that we can. Because when we drop the piston in, we're going to knock it down and we want to avoid hitting the journal. Now we're actually going to get some little vacuum caps or just pieces of like fuel hose. We're going to cut them so we can put them on the rod bolts, so when we knock it down in, it's not going to hit that journal and damage it. Kind of like what happened last time before we had to have this polished. We already did measure all of our top compression rings in the block, so we know they're good, and we know between each cylinder, what goes where. 1 through 6, so we're going to grab the suiting pistons and do the same thing. On a lot of cars, the tang inside the rod is actually separate. I believe it is on the VG. However, on this 3000 GT, the tang, they're both on the same side. And if you put it on the opposite way, you're actually going to see that the connecting rod will stick out on the side and be kind of like not centered. So we're going to pull the cap off, make sure that we realign that once it goes back on. But for these, once we pop it in, we've just got these vacuum caps. Looks like I need to get some more snug ones because that's not going to work. So we're just going to clean up here inside of this so we can actually mount our bearing inside of here. At least we're not going to mount it yet, but we will obviously before we put it in, because we've already checked clearances on all this and we know we're good to go. We're all within spec for standard usage or standard sizing. Just going to dry off some of the piston for some of this parts washer fluid that's on it still. And when you do this, you're going to want to make sure that it's facing forward. And if you are working on, say, this exact engine, this is the factory service manual on how to gap and rotate them rings appropriately. So that's what we're going to follow. Basically, the way you're going to do this with the piston facing forward, you're going to have the lower oil ring Over here is going to be the expander ring. Up here is going to be the other oil ring. Down here is where your first compression ring is, and then on the opposite side, this is where the gap for your last compression ring is. Just take your time with this. Don't really like force anything, because if any of your rings are not really in the right spot, it's going to be kind of tough. Actually, I forgot. You got to put your oil expander in first, because it actually has like little indentations to allow the scraper rings to go inside. So that's what I get for not having done this for so long. Now the oil expander is in place. We can put our lower oil ring in and then come back with the upper and get them all in the appropriate position. You always want to kind of squish your rings too to make sure that they're not bound up and that they'll actually compress when you go to put the ring compressor on. Now you can use a ring expander here, but it's not like entirely necessary. You can do everything that you need just by feeding it in, lapping it around the piston, and getting it seated. And you always want to be careful with the compression rings because they are very, very stiff, and you can actually scrape your piston by installing it. On your bottom compression ring here for the VR4 3000 GTs, you're actually going to have a spot that says top, because if you look at the ring itself, it's going to have kind of like a beveled or tapered edge, and one side is going to be super sharp. So you want it to be sharp going up the cylinder so it can bite into that wall and give you compression. Never hurts to rotate them a little bit just to make sure, the same way as compressing them to make sure that they compress. Now we're going to gap 180 degrees away with our upper ring. Just like that, our rings are all gapped, and we actually can now go and put a little bit of oil on them. Now you don't have to go super crazy here. You really just want the oil to soak into the rings and just allow everything to seat nicely. Once everything's gapped appropriately, grab your ring compressor. It's usually better to get like the Wiseco ones that are fixed size where you just pop it down in because it's tapered the farther it goes in, so it compresses the rings. Or you go to Harbor Freight or the parts store and you get one like this that you manually tighten. So we're going to put this, make sure all of our gaps are correct. Make sure it's bigger than the piston so you can slide it over them rings and not bounce them all around. And this one has a tendency to oval out. So what I like to do is hold the piston with my fingers while holding this compressor to kind of keep it centered so I can crank this down and tighten them rings. Compress them, whatever. Get it as tight as you can, look inside, kind of move the piston back and forth. Sometimes the ring will push the piston to a certain side, and slice your hand open like me. Nice. So that right there is single-handedly why I recommend the Wiseco tapered ones, so you don't have to slice your hand. Thankfully, I cleaned it up, got Neosporin on it to kind of chill it out before I have to super glue it, because this is a terrible spot. Never gonna get anything to stick. I guess we can install it now. Thankfully, my hand's a little bit better now, but we did actually go ahead. We moved forward and we popped 4 of our pistons in. So basically, I'm here to show you guys how to put one cylinder in so I can save the last cylinder for the TikTok or short or whatever. And since I freshly sliced my hand, I just wasn't in the, want to be recording. I was kind of irritated, and plus, I had to be extra careful. I had to get the hang of having this on my hand so I could do this correctly. So, we're going to put the rings back on and get this number 5 piston ready to drop in. And we'll pretty much resume where we were before I sliced myself. You're going to want to put this section right here away from any ring gap. If it's not right here, it'll actually allow one of the ring ends to kind of poke out and can actually keep it from seating down. Fit it about halfway down the piston, and then we can tighten up the ring compressor. Maybe. Try to keep it square on there. And you'll know when it's tight. But before you go putting anything in, you want to kind of center the piston in the piston ring compressor, because if it's cocked one way to the side, you can actually smash your ring on the deck when you go to tighten this down. So you want to get that centered the best that you can and get it as tight as you can. We actually have one more thing to do, that is to install the bearing on the actual rod. Locate your tang. I always kind of start it first. We can push this down in. It does help to kind of like push it inwards to squish the bearing. Then you can kind of snake it down into place. Now that's pretty much ready to install with one minor thing. I'm also going to put a little bit of oil down here in these wrist pin guides and on the wrist pin just to make sure that's all lubricated. Take a little bit of assembly lube, put a line on it, and then smear it around to make sure it's all coated because you don't want any dry surfaces. Another little thing I like to do is just give one final wipe in between the rod and the rod cap, just to make sure there's no debris in between to kind of hinder that seal. Now we can actually put it in the block. Except we need to oil the cylinder wall before we drop this in. Now some people use gloves when it comes to all this, but as long as your hands are clean, I feel like that's the best bet, because if you have like debris on your hands, you're gonna feel it before you do with the glove on. So just get it lightly doused. You don't need it super wet because the rings are gonna scrape it all off anyways, because that's their job. So we're gonna take the piston, put the arrow pointing forward. This is about the case for every engine that I know of. You want to guide the rod in nicely so you don't nick the cylinder wall with any of these sharp corners on the rod. And you'll just use the piston skirt to get down in the bore to get it all started. Just like that. You see we can rotate it wherever we want. Now before you go knocking this in, you want to go to the bottom side and actually check to make sure that your rod is not going to hit the crank, especially not your rod bearing. It is possible, depending how cockeyed you have it, but generally as long as this is pointing forward, you're pretty much in the right direction. But you can kind of see through here, well, those two bolts do not line up. So we actually need to rotate it a little bit to get them as even as possible so we avoid that tap on the crank when we push the piston in. There's one final step before we actually tap this down in, and you always want to take these kind of ring compressors, tap them down so you get all of the sleeve uniform on the block, so it's actually fully compressing that piston. And you just take your hammer and just like that, we installed a piston. I'm not really sure how that happened, but our rod is actually on the wrong side of the crank. So we have that little bit of room. We're going to try to spin the crank, get this journal facing downwards, so then we can push this piston up a little bit and swap it over. And once you have it right where you want it, if you don't have caps on top of your rod bolts, move it over to kind of keep it centered, and tap on your piston to slide it downwards. And now our rod is officially on the crank drive. Now let's flip it over and we can begin to install our other bearing and our rod cap. I'm actually going to rotate the engine over just a little to move this over so we can actually get this cap on this rod. Since we moved it, I'm actually going to tap the piston so we can move it completely flat in case it moved whatsoever. Alright, we're good. Once your bearing and your rod cap as clean as can be, I'm going to press that down in, and then we're going to lube it up with some assembly lube. Make sure that bearing has lube all over it. No dry starts around here. We're going to line up this tang, and we're going to drop the cap on. I like to kind of pinch the sides to get it seated, and then you can actually go back with a mallet and tap that on just to make sure it's completely seated and flush. So to prevent our fasteners here from, going on dry, we're actually just going to drip a little bit of oil, not only on the threads for a good torque reading, but actually on the rod, so it sandwiches perfectly and doesn't have any like crunching or metal on it. Now we can install our rod bolt nuts, and we're actually going to walk these down as even as we can. So I always go finger tight with both, and then about, a 1/16 of a turn with a torque wrench, and then maybe start with a 1/4, then an 1/8, then a 1/16. Basically so we can turn it the least amount as possible while walking it down evenly. Once you feel it getting kind of tight, that's when I start pulling it a little less hard, because you really don't want to over torque this at all. If you do, you could stretch bolts, you could squish bearings, Torque. I forgot to say we're tightening these down to 38 foot-pounds via the factory service manual, straight from Mitsubishi. And then we'll hit it one more time over here just to recheck our torque. That's how you install a rod inside of your block. Now to help yourself moving forward, right here I always move this journal as centered as you can so you can put that cap on and not have to worry about spinning it one last time. And also when it's right here, it's the perfect time to go ahead, give it a nice little wipe down of any potential debris. And then we do the same thing, and you'll do it 6 times. Or 8 if you got a V8, or 4 times if you got a 4-banger. So we're gonna knock this out, get it to, I don't know, maybe where we can get on to cleaning the oil pan and just kind of be almost done with this thing. So we actually got the 6th one in now, and we've already went and rotated it over so we know that everything's working smoothly. But there's really no like tight spots, nowhere that it stops. It's just when it stops, it takes a second to kind of get it going again. Well, maybe like 3 pounds of force, I assume, because of the pressure of all the rings sticking to the cylinders. But the bottom end is assembled, and I am super ecstatic. Especially after the mishaps we had the very first, second, and third time. 4th time's a charm in this case, and I'm actually pretty comfortable with this one now, and also measuring and assembling engines. Like, I don't know, I really enjoy this. It's fun, and it kind of feels like I'm a surgeon or something, because you got to be super clean and super precise, or else patience. Super excited to get the rest of this together. Unfortunately, I was wanting to get the freeze plugs in, but I can't find sandpaper or Scotch-Brite to kind of clean up them bores, because you want to clean them up before you put the anaerobic sealant in to tap them freeze plugs in. Well, let's just say right now I don't know, I suck. I lost them. They're in here somewhere. I swore that I sat them right up here, but for some reason they're gone. And when we come over here, I actually have all of the bronze, or not bronze, but brass ones for the 300GX for our next engine assembly. Which, yes, if you guys didn't know, I do have a couple VGs that I need to build. I actually have some turbo pistons and stuff that I pulled out of one. I got a couple sets of ACL bearings. I've actually got a block in here that has some ACL mains in it. I'm gonna guess it's that one since it's all covered up, and that one actually has none, because that's actually Brian's that kind of blew up. Not only do we have a bunch of blocks, we've got 4 right here, and honestly, well, at least one of these is good as is. I think I have 13 more VGs over at my parts shop. But here, just like the crank that we had for this Mitsubishi, we actually took this one to the machine shop. The one that has a crank machine, and they polished it up, cleaned it up for me. Now, one big thing I need to do is to get on this RB over here. I've got an RB25 that, well, someone put it together in school, and they didn't recheck their torque. They torqued it once, one and done. When I went to take the rod bolts off, one of the rod nuts was way looser than the other side. Like, it was half the torque. Like, they yeeted it on, went to the other, didn't go back and, you know, sync it up. Not to mention this RB25 crank, if you can see, it's got a tiny crank collar on it. Later in the years, they were revised to be more like this one. Kind of hard to see, but there's way more of a keyway for that to ride on. Collar, not keyway. And it actually, you know, on this one, on my RB25, it's kind of damaged because it's been slipping in the oil pump, so it's kind of rounding it out. We actually bought an RB26 crank, brand new in box from Nissan, and it's in our parts storage room. I'm kind of waiting for the right time to do that because I need to get a rotating assembly. I need rods and pistons to bump it to an RB26. So that's a whole nother animal. I will be taking that crank out very soon so I can take it to the machine shop, get it polished up, and then I can try to sell it to kind of, you know, recoup some money and, you know, put it into that car so we can start doing something. But for now, unfortunately, I think we're going to call this video quits. I was really wanting to get everything else, you know, situated, like those freeze plugs, get our oil pan cleaned up. I think we're going to paint this up, so I need to take a little bit more time with it and kind of, you know, make it pretty. But it does still kind of have oil residue, and that's not going to be fun to do here at, you know, 10 at night. But it's coming very soon. We're actually going to go to Brad's tomorrow evening so we can grab the heads, probably a couple more brackets and things since I have the factory service manual and I can put it back together. Maybe we'll clean some of it up. Maybe he's already cleaned it up. But we got to get our head bolts. We do have a gasket kit and an oil pump down there. I could put the oil pump on, but it has an old gasket, and I really want to get that all cleaned up and perfect, honestly, to clean out the oil pump before we slap it onto this one. We can't use the original one that was on it because it spun tons of bearings, main, rod, whatever, and there was tons of debris in this engine. So I hope you guys learned something today. At least maybe if you've been on the fence about building your own motor, yes, there's a lot of risk if you don't know what you're doing, but I've kind of played around with a bunch of used stuff to get the idea of it all. We did already do the measurements on this, so you can kind of check back, look for any other VR4 3000 GT content that I've posted. It should cover all that. But anyways, thank you guys for watching, and we're gonna go in and edit a video because we need one out tomorrow. And technically I'm 2 weeks late on it, and it's a whole nother video that has nothing to do with this. So thank you guys for sticking around, and also thank all of you guys for being super supportive through my, you know, next steps or my hurdles that I've been dealing with. That you guys were, yeah, you just blew my mind, or blew me away, to be honest. I really thought I was gonna lose a bunch of you, but you guys are awesome. You've done nothing but support me and help me to, you know, keep looking forward and to do better and, you know, make myself better. But again, thank all of you guys, and until the next one, we'll catch you then. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace.